what's going on?
Man, this is like the last little piece of heaven here, it looks like.
He's looking for diamonds in the rough. With Lee Cowan, meet American picker Mike Wolfe.
And really, we're just more or less challenging ourselves to find other things that people don't expect us to find. You know, we're transportation buyers, you know, motorcycles, cars, anything related to that. So now...
Lately, the headlines surrounding American Picker's star, Mike Wolfe, have had far less to do with antiques and far more to do with the changes taking place in his personal and professional life. From major shifts within the show to growing speculation about what comes next, many fans have begun wondering whether Mike Wolfe is entering a new chapter altogether. So what is really happening behind the headlines? And why are so many longtime viewers paying close attention now? Join us as we uncover the latest developments surrounding Mike Wolfe, the store that closed after 15 years. For over a decade, Mike Wolfe's Nashville store was seen as a physical extension of American Pickers itself. Fans frequently traveled across the country just to have a glimpse of what antique archaeology felt like, hoping to experience a small piece of the world they had learned to love after watching on television for more than 10 years. The building became much more than a regular antique business. It had easily become part of the brand. For many visitors, it was the closest thing to walking through the show, but without cameras and a crew following closely behind. And that's exactly why the announcement cut deep when it came. When Mike finally announced that the Nashville location would be closing after nearly 15 years, fans were stunned as to why this decision was made. As expected, this move immediately sparked wild questions and assumptions, triggering reactions across social media, fan forums, and entertainment blogs, because many people had grown to view the store as one of the strongest symbols of his success. In an hour-long interview, Mike had mentioned that his decision to close the store, the first retail outlet to open in the converted car manufacturing compound, Marathon Village in North Nashville, came with mixed feelings. He further described his emotional longing to spend more time with his relatives and friends in Iowa and to restore dilapidated buildings in his hometown. After describing the move as a difficult but necessary next step, he further explained that the store has given him some incredible opportunities and unforgettable memories. Yet he felt it was time to shift priorities and focus more on other paths in his life and business ventures. On the surface, it sounded like a valid reason to suddenly close the store. But behind the scenes, the timing was raising eyebrows. The timing made everything even worse than it already was. The closure didn't happen on its own. It came during a period when the circumstances surrounding American Pickers were becoming complicated and messy. Viewers began to notice changes in the show's dynamics, already questioning its long-term direction and speculating about the next phase of Mike Wolfe's career on the show. When the announcement was made, it became an impossible yet subtle signal to ignore. Some fans interpreted it as a strategic reset or a step back from the physical demands of retail operations to focus more on media production, restoration projects, and brand expansion. Others saw it as a reflection of burnout after years of constant travel, filming schedules, and the pressure of maintaining a nationally recognized image. Even so, Mike's tone remained constant throughout. There was no public conflict attached to the closure and no suggestion of collapse. He rather framed it as a transition towards something different, even though he didn't spell out what different really meant. Still, transitions, especially in the world of long-running television personalities, are rarely silent. They tend to have ripple effects, creating speculations that override any official explanations. And in this case, those rookies were already beginning to look like something beyond the ordinary, because while fans were still processing the end of an era for the store, another layer was emerging around the show that had made it famous in the first place. And that next shift would raise far more questions than the closing storefront ever could. The comment that made fans crazy. Only a few things can shake the core of a long-term television fan base faster than uncertainty, especially when that uncertainty comes from someone inside the circle. And that's exactly what happened when Danielle Colby, a longtime American Pickers cast member, made some remarks on her birthday that fans interpreted as a signal that the show as a whole was coming to an end. In a few hours, those comments started to circulate across social media, stripped out of context and made to be something far more alarming than what was said originally. She had mentioned that the show was done, and, as expected, the reaction then was explosive online almost immediately. For a show that has run for over 15 long years, American Pickers wasn't mere entertainment anymore. By now, it had become a routine for millions of fans. As the speculation spread, so did confusion and misconception. Some online posts insisted that the series had been officially canceled, while others claimed that production was just winding down behind the scenes. People kept debating whether the show had reached its peak, or something strange was happening within the cast and production team. And in situations like this, silence tends to make things even worse than they already are. The lack of immediate clarity allowed speculation to run wild and become much louder than the original comment, so much so that the original comment was forgotten. Eventually, the mess created became too large to simply ignore. Mike Wolfe reportedly had to step in to address the situation, pushing back against the idea that American Pickers had already been canceled for good. According to multiple entertainment reports, he clarified that the series was not officially over and that discussions around further production were still ongoing. He further went on to describe the whole situation as a necessary pause to catch up, rather than a permanent shutdown. Danielle, after seeing the uproar and nostalgia it had caused, clarified on her Instagram that her done comments were made strictly from a personal paycheck standpoint. On a Thursday, January 1st, Colby, at this time 50 years old, went online with a video recapping her starting her own business, a museum dedicated to the history of stripping called the Ecdysiast Arts Museum. The reality TV star opened the business venture in mid-2024 in Davenport, Iowa. To make things feel more natural, Colby included a clip of her giving followers a tour of the building, renovating the space, hosting events, and more. On paper, that should have easily settled things, but it didn't. Even with Mike's reassurance, the issue had long since shifted from what it was originally about. It was no longer about whether the show would return. It was now whether it would ever feel the same after so much uproar. But beneath it all, one name kept resurfacing in conversations among fans: Frank Fritz. His absence had already left a quite visible gap in the show's dynamics, but the renewed discussion around the series brought that absence back into focus. For many fans, he was both a co-host and part of the original chemistry that helped keep the show authentic in the first place. Once people started talking about Frank again, the emotional drain around American Pickers changed in a way that no official clarification could fully curb. This started looking like it wasn't about the cancellation anymore. The legacy, and what gets left behind when it seems like the familiar chapter began to fracture, is even more frightening than what caused the whole issue in the first place: the split that finally broke them apart. Fans kept asking this one question: how did it all fall apart between the two men who built American Pickers from the ground up? The beautiful friendship journey between Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz began decades before they ever stepped in front of a television camera. They originally first met in middle school and graduated from the same high school in 1982. For over a decade, they worked as co-hosts on the show. Since 2010, they have traveled together across America in search of forgotten antiques, filming more than 300 episodes and building a format that hasn't been replicated since then. Fans loved to see the duo interact on screen, and this has led many to believe that the nearly lifelong friends were inseparable. But by 2020, Frank had stepped away from filming due to growing health issues, and the pause quickly became permanent. In 2021, the History Channel officially confirmed that Frank Fritz would not be returning to American Pickers. That announcement marked the end of an era that fans had assumed would continue indefinitely. Eventually, Mike spoke about his estrangement with Frank, saying that the reality of it is that Frank was doing a lot of things that he was not supposed to do. He also mentioned that he had fought hard for him and loved him, and that no matter how hard he wanted something for him, he had to make the decision to stop on his own. This statement fueled the speculations and more. But what made the situation more complicated was what came after. Frank later spoke publicly about feeling disconnected from the show and expressed frustration over how the transition had unfolded. In interviews, he suggested that communication between him and Mike Wolfe had broken down over time. Those comments fueled widespread discussion among fans, many of whom began revisiting earlier episodes with a very different perspective. At that point, the American Pickers stopped being just about antiques. While public conversations continued to circulate, Frank's life took a much more difficult turn behind the scenes. He had a medical emergency that left him hospitalized and marked a serious decline in his health, with updates indicating a long and difficult recovery process. As if that wasn't enough, then came 2024. What happened next made everything a whole lot more complicated for both men, completely changing Frank's life forever. The loss that still haunts him. For years, Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz were the core of American Pickers. They basically built the show together from its earliest episodes, traveling across America. They had a beautiful balance that made the series work. They had grown to understand each other well enough to finish the other's conversation without saying everything out loud. Over time, that familiarity became part of what fans adored most. As the series progressed, even with their chemistry, subtle reports of tension between the two men began circulating publicly. Interviews and statements from both sides suggested that the working relationship had become strained, particularly around production decisions and Frank's role on the show. This situation eventually escalated to the point where Frank eventually stepped away from the series, and Mike continued filming with other cast members. To make matters worse than they already were, Fritz suggested Wolfe was plotting to replace him on the series with his brother, Robbie Wolfe. He went on to say that their beef wasn't just TV-related, as he hadn't talked to Mike in about 2 years. He publicly stated that Mike knew he was messed up, but he didn't call to check in and ask how he was doing. At the time, reactions were divided. Then, more serious issues developed in Frank Fritz's personal life. On July 2022, Frank suffered a stroke. The incident led to hospitalization and a long period of recovery, with reports indicating that his health remained fragile after the stroke. During this time, public attention, as expected, returned to his earlier departure from the show, with many fans revisiting old interviews and scenes in a new light. The situation became even more tragic in 2024, when reports confirmed Frank Fritz had passed away at the age of 60. The news of his passing immediately triggered outbursts from fans and colleagues who had followed his career for more than a decade. Mike Wolfe also addressed Frank's passing publicly following the news. He reflected on their early days filming American Pickers and acknowledged Frank's role in building the foundation of the show. According to statements reported, Mike emphasized that without Frank, the series would not have existed in its original form or achieved its early success. And as those conversations continue, one question keeps resurfacing among viewers who have followed the journey from the beginning. What does the future of American Pickers look like when its original foundation has already changed so significantly? The cost of keeping everything running. For years before this period, Mike had presented a steady public image. On American Pickers, he came across as focused, consistent, and deeply committed to preserving history rather than chasing attention. But away from the cameras, his long-term marriage to Jodie Faith had already been going through its own quiet strain. Mike and Jodie had been together long before the height of American Pickers. They shared a life that existed outside television, raising their daughter, Franklin, and building what many assumed was a stable family structure behind the scenes. For fans, it often looked like one of the few parts of Mike's life that wasn't shaped by the unpredictability of reality TV success and a quality to be imbibed. That perfect picture began to fade as popularity and pressure increased. Filming schedules started stretching across long periods. His business ventures had expanded beyond television into retail, publishing, and now brand partnerships. At the same time, the pressure of maintaining a long-running hit series meant Mike was constantly balancing public expectations with his private responsibilities, beginning to take a toll on him. Over time, the balance he had between these aspects began to break down noticeably. Reports of separation began circulating before anything was officially confirmed. Eventually, Jodie, who was 50 years old at the time, filed for a divorce after almost 9 years of marriage. She mentioned that the hopes to reconcile were exhausted, and they were unable to live together as a normal couple should. The divorce was finalized in June 2020, bringing an end to their relationship. After the divorce settlement proceedings piqued even more curiosity. The court ordered Mike Wolfe to pay a sum of $8 million, including royalties from the show and alimony. Jodie was also awarded their $2 million Tennessee marital home and their North Carolina abode. Much more than the financial settlements, the broader takeaway wasn't about the numbers she was getting out of the marriage, but the timing. Because it happened during a period when Mike's professional world was already under intense pressure. Mike, on the other hand, did not frame the divorce publicly as dramatic or hostile. Instead, in interviews around that period, he maintained a consistent tone, respectful, restrained, and focused on co-parenting and moving forward. Again, just as one chapter of his personal life closed, the questions surrounding his professional world were only becoming more intense. The future of American Pickers was still being debated by fans. The memory of Frank Fritz was still shaping how audiences viewed the show. And now Mike himself was stepping into a phase of life in which both his public identity and his private foundation were being redefined at the same time. And what comes next is usually not a continuation, but a complete redirection that turned his life 360. The incident that added more to the headlines. Just when things seemed to be settling back down, another story pushed Mike Wolfe back into the news cycle. This time around, it involved one of his Tennessee businesses. According to local reports and early coverage circulated by outlets, a vehicle accidentally crashed into a vintage gas pump located outside Columbia Motor Alley, causing visible damage to part of the property. Fortunately, no serious injuries were reported, and the situation was handled without a major escalation in emergency response. On paper, it was the kind of isolated incident that would normally stay a brief local news item. But from everything in Mike Wolfe's world, very little stays quiet for long. From the very moment images and short clips of the damaged setup began circulating online, the story quickly picked up traction among fans of American Pickers and followers of his broader business ventures. And it was from here that the interpretation split began again. An ordinary damaged gas pump became part of a growing list of signs that people tried to interpret. Some viewers framed it as a sort of reinvention, while others read it as uncertainty, pointing to how frequently Mike's professional and personal milestones had appeared in the news cycle over a relatively short span of time. While neither of these interpretations fully captured his reality, both reflected the same truth: that the attention that once flourished around Mike Wolfe had significantly shifted from fan curiosity about American pickers to scrutiny of every single thing and person connected to his name. Publicly, amidst these controversies, Mike has continued to move forward without indicating any pause in his trajectory. His focus remains on expanding projects tied to preservation, restoration, and storytelling around American history. New business ventures and media appearances continue to reinforce the idea that he is still actively building and unaffected. And for viewers who have followed him for more than a decade, that next chapter is the one they are watching most closely, even if no one can fully predict where it leads next. Do you think Mike's biggest chapter is still to come? Or has his turning point started? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.